Welcome back to T24 podcast by Bunmi Odulaja, which caters for various aspects of your life. If you're single, or even if you're in a relationship, you're hoping that it will lead to marriage, this is a podcast for you. It also caters for you if you're a married person looking to strengthen your relationship. My why as a podcaster is to cater for and help children of God to thrive in their relationships. So for today, the series we're going to be looking at today is Boundaries in Marriage. And today is the first episode of 4. Okay, so I will be sharing with you from my experience as a married person for almost 3 decades, as a certified counselor. I'm also a mother of 2 amazing children, and I also lead the marriage ministry in my local church. So, from my experience, there are different things that happens in marriages. So I'm going to be walking through with us boundaries in marriage, as I said. Over the next 4 weeks, I will walk through with you as to how you can navigate boundaries in marriage. The series will be very practical, so I'll be asking you to jot down some points as you go along. So if you haven't already done so, pause now and get your writing material or bring up the notes on your phone, because you'll be having a lot of things to jot down as we go along. Okay, so what do we look at in this particular series? As we know, we're all products of the things we were exposed to from our childhood. However, I also believe that we can unlearn some of the poor modeling that we witnessed from our childhood and aim to do better and to be better from what we have seen or learned whilst growing up. I like to always start my sessions with definitions, because I think having a definition helps you to be able to understand the premise of what we're discussing. So what is boundary? I hear you say. Boundary is the limit we set to protect the purity, for instance, of our marriage. Your marriage is a plan of God. I'm sure you already know that. It deserves to be protected and respected. Boundaries is also that line that you put between yourself and something else or someone else. Having boundaries will help you to determine how much of the external influences you want to allow in your relationship. We'll talk more about that later on. Okay, boundaries also helps you to look at your values. When you're clear on your values, your boundaries are also made clearer. Okay, so boundaries enable you to draw a line between yourself and your spouse if you're married. It allows you to have ownership and responsibilities between each parties being made very clear. Boundaries allow you to take responsibilities for your own action. When you're clear on your boundaries and you're clear on your spouse's boundary. Simply put, boundary is being clear on this is okay and that it's not okay. Okay, now that we have defined what boundaries is, let's explore this very important issue further. The first activity I'm going to ask you to do is for you to jot down why you think boundaries are important in a healthy relationship or in a healthy marriage. I'm going to invite you to pause for a minute and jot down your thoughts as to why boundaries are important in a healthy marriage. I'm hoping that you've been able to jot down a couple of things that you have noted. So let's look at this. Why are boundaries important in a marriage? Allow me to give you some more points that you can add to the list that you've already come up with. Why are boundaries important? One of the goals of boundaries is to define your sense of self so that you guard and you can maintain it. Defining your boundaries enables you and your spouse to be clear on what behavior is acceptable and which one is not. Lack of boundaries open the door for others to determine what your thoughts should be, how you should feel, and the need for including external people within your marriage. It is critical, especially when you're dealing with in-laws, friends, and family members. Boundaries ensure that you are very clear on the things that are important to you and to your marriage. Marriage is for big boys and big girls. Okay. So another thing that boundaries does is boundaries help you to resolve or prevent conflict between you and your spouse and ensuring that you do not get hurt. As an example, you can set boundaries around how you will conduct yourselves in conflict situations. This could include no name callings, no shouting, no gaslighting of each other. We all know that when emotions are high, we could easily slip, but making sure you have a boundary in place as to how you will conduct yourselves in such situation is very helpful. Also, boundaries helps you to maintain clear priorities within your relationship. How do you balance the important issues in your marriage? Boundaries allows you to do that. It might be that in one season of your life, you are prioritizing one person's agenda item over the other. And then you decide these are the goals we would focus on in this season of our marriage, and then you can move on to the next person's one. You must be prepared to ensure that appropriate time is set for your goals and your boundaries. Okay, let's move on slightly to that. Having boundaries also ensures that there is no room for ambiguity when it comes to acceptable behavior, attitude, values, and much more. Okay, now that we have defined what boundaries are and why they are important in a healthy marriage, over the next 4 episodes, we'll focus on 4 types of boundaries in a marriage. Earlier, I got you to jot down a few things as to why you think boundaries are important in a marriage. So let us look at some of the boundaries that we're going to talk about. The first boundary we are going to explore is going to be the emotional boundary. Emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are the limit a person sets when it comes to the energy or emotion they are prepared to give and receive in their relationship. This involves separating your feelings from the feelings of the other person, including your spouse. Okay? Here is another exercise I want you to take on now. Pause and quickly jot down what you consider to be the key features of a healthy boundary in marriage. Okay, welcome back. I hope you found it helpful to pen your thoughts. This will be referenced as we go along in this episode. Let me now give you some key features of healthy emotional boundaries. If you already have some of this on your list, that's great. If you don't, just add this to your list so you have a more comprehensive list. As a podcaster, for clarity, I like to provide definitions. I think it's helpful, as I mentioned earlier. It's an aid to understanding. It's also helps for you to be able to reference things as you go along. So, for you to have a healthy emotional boundaries in marriage, these are some of the things that you must have in place. Number one, honesty. Honesty is to be free of deceit, to be truthful, to be sincere. It is also about telling the truth of your opinion and feelings, even sometimes when it might disappoint the other person. Talking to the other person about how you feel in a respectful way is important. However, it must be, when you're talking about it, make sure you're doing this in love. Do not say because you want to be honest, you are attacking the other person's character. That will not be productive. Having honesty in your relationship helps to maintain and sustain mutual respect, trust in your marriage. Dishonesty can lead to negative emotions such as insecurity, distrust, mistrust, and disrespect. The second feature is faithfulness. Faithfulness. This is about being steadfast in affection. It is about being firm in adherence to promises and the observance of duty. Remember your wedding day and the vows you took. You did promise to be faithful. You did promise to keep and honor your vows. So you must be ready and be prepared to keep this promise if you are to have a healthy emotional boundaries in your marriage. Unfaithfulness destroys the fabric and foundation of any marriage. I like to reference the observance of duty, which is the duty to protect your marriage from external influences. As I said earlier, this includes protection from friends and sometimes some family members. It is important that you do everything to maintain and be faithful to your spouse, honoring your vows, always protecting your marriage. This requires that you do not put yourselves in positions where it could lead to unfaithful acts. Okay? The third thing is self-control. Self-control is the ability to regulate, alter your responses to avoid undesired behavior, actions, while increasing desirable ones, and achieving long-term goals. Self-control is important if you are going to be able to control your emotions and reactions to situations. You know, in a marriage, yes, as much as you love each other, there will be conflicts, there will be disagreements. However, it is how you handle this conflict or these disagreements that is the key. The solution to how you handle conflicts lies in self-control rather than controlling your spouse. If you haven't already listened to my series on conflict resolution, I would recommend that you pause this series, go and listen to that first. And that would give you more information about how self-control is important in managing respect and managing emotional boundaries in your marriage. The fourth feature here is good communication. Good communication helps you to convey assertiveness and clarity in relation to your expectations of yourself and of your spouse. Good communication also helps you to define what you are comfortable with and what you are not. If your communication is not respectful, there is a high possibility that you don't have a healthy emotional boundary present in your marriage. Open and respectful dialogue, yes, dialogue, meaning two of you are able to speak and convey your viewpoints to the other person. Let's look closely as to how emotional boundaries could be violated in a relationship, in this case, in a marriage. It is easy to violate emotional boundaries in a marriage. This could be as a result of familiarity, really, with your spouse, and sometimes taking your spouse for granted. Sadly, in some marriages, where one or both parties no longer are emotionally available, this might be due to unresolved issues, unmet expectation, unmet needs, or even season of life where their love bank is completely empty. You might find that emotional boundaries are violated. When emotional boundaries are violated, this sometimes manifests itself in these ways. Taking responsibilities for the feelings or action of the other person. Blaming yourself for their own action. You will hear things such as, it is my fault that she got angry. It is my fault that he got angry. If I hadn't said that, or if I hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been angry. The second thing here is letting the feelings of others dictate your own feelings and blaming, others for your own mistakes or action. And, as a marriage counselor, sadly, I've heard these over and over again in the counseling room when, say a husband has done something and he's like, oh, I did that because you did this. And instead of the person taking responsibility for their own action, they're blaming their spouse for the action. Emotional affair is another way that emotional boundaries can be violated. What is an emotional affair, you ask? It is the affair of the arts without physically cheating on your spouse. It is the bond between two people that mimics the closeness of emotional intimacy of a romantic relationship without never being physically consummated. So how do you prevent this? Really, there are loads of things you can do, but let me give you a couple of things here. First of all, friendship with a person of the opposite sex must never be a secret from your spouse. Ensure that you include your spouse in any relationship with a person of the opposite sex. Conversation must include your spouse. It is important that you do all of this to protect the fabric of your marriage. Let me share some statistics, shocking as they are, statistics with you of a survey of married people. So, in a survey of 90,000 people, 91.6% of women and 78% of men had emotional affairs. 70 of flirtatious relationship go on to become physical relationship. 60% of emotional affairs involving men begin at work by spending a lot of time with someone they know from work. Women's emotional affairs, on the other hand, also sometimes start with people they work with who are paying them attention compared to maybe what their spouse is doing. Thus, meeting an emotional need that their husbands are not meeting. Lastly, more emotional affairs are now linked to social media these days, with the easy access to sliding and DMing an ex or starting conversation, that later then develops to emotional affairs. Care must be taken. Care must be taken, as most affairs would start with a friendship. He or she is just a friend, you would hear people say. Then the emotions deepens. Emotional affairs would take away the intimacy with your spouse as you are discussing confidential and sometimes very intimate aspects of your life with someone that is not your spouse. Guard against it. Protect yourself. Protect your marriage. Okay, let me give you a couple of scriptures that I think might be helpful to you to anchor on while you ponder upon this further. The first scripture I'm going to give you is in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, and I'm reading from the NIV version. Guard your heart, for out of it do flow everything. What does this mean in relation to having healthy emotional boundaries in your marriage? The scripture encourages us to set emotional and moral boundaries, really. By guarding our hearts, we can protect our emotions, our desires, as well as it protects us from sinful influences. The second scripture is in Galatians 6, verses 7 and 8, where it says, "Don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. Those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from the sinful nature. Those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit." If you have had boundaries violated in your marriage, or if the content of this podcast has triggered you in any way, I realize these are heavy stuff. Please seek the support of a trained counselor or from someone that you respect from your local church. God ordained your marriage. It is too important. So do everything that you can not to cross the boundary lines. Okay, I hope, so that's the episode for today. I hope you got a few nuggets there that you can start to build on. In the next episode, we will go on to look at other types of boundaries in marriage. Thank you very much for listening to T2 Podcast by Bunmi Odulaja. I will see you in the next episode.